Hi, Epic Recaps here, and today I'm going to explain to you a 2001 American horror film titled The Others. If you want to be spoiled, keep watching. It is 1945 in Jersey and Grace Stewart, a mother of two, wakes up from a nightmare. The Second World War has just ended, but there has been no word of her husband, who fought in France. That morning, three servants, Lydia, Mr. Tuttle, and Mrs. Mills arrive at her door in response to an ad she posted for new help. They are all shown around the house by Grace, who explains that must never open a door without closing the previous one, and the drapes must always be shut because her children are allergic to the sunlight. Grace wakes up Ann and Nicholas and introduces them to the new servants. At breakfast, Ann tells Mrs. Mills that the previous servants just up and left without a word and then her mummy went mad. Nicholas disagrees and argues that nothing happened. Later that morning, Grace goes to the mailbox and sees that the letters she'd sent out to the newspaper announcing the ads are still there. She confronts Mrs. Mills angrily, demanding to know who they are. And how did they know of the jobs if the ad hasn't even come out yet? Mrs. Mills then tells Grace that all three of them had used to live in the house, and had loved it so much that they come back to see if they could be of any use. Accepting the explanation, Grace informs her that the house is very old and often makes strange noises. Not believing in ghosts, she asks Mrs. Mills not to trust everything the children say. Later in the day, Grace is with the children going over their studies, and mentions her invisible friend Victor and his family and insists there are others walking around the house. Grace, refusing to believe her, tells her to stop lying and punishes her by having her study alone by candlelight. Downstairs, Mrs. Mills wisely tells Grace that sometimes the world of the living gets mixed up in the world of the dead. One afternoon, Grace is sewing Anne's first communion veil in the playroom when she hears loud thumping that causes the chandelier to shake. When she heads upstairs to investigate, she finds the room empty. Suddenly startled by voices, Grace searches the room for the hidden intruders and uncovers a mirror, where she sees the door behind her close by itself. Rushing out, she sees Anne at the top of the stairs, who tells her she saw a group of people that claim the house is theirs. A frantic Grace rushes to the playroom and Anne shows her the picture she'd drawn of Victor and his family along with an old woman with sightless eyes. Frightened for her children, she orders Mr. Tuttle and Lydia to search the entire house to find the people in Anne's portrait. By the fireplace, the children sit with Mrs. Mill and Anne complains that her mother thinks her a liar. Mrs. Mills assures Anne that, unlike her mother, she believes her and that soon her mother will see. Back upstairs, with Anne's portrait in her hand, Grace discovers a 19th century album of mourning containing photos of deceased family members with missing pages. Showing her the book, she asks Mrs. Mills about her previous time at the house and is told that the owners were evacuated due to a tuberculosis outbreak. That night, Grace stays up crying and is startled when she suddenly hears music coming from downstairs and goes to investigate. Opening the ballroom door, she hears the piano playing, but the room is empty. She quickly slams the lid shut and locks it before leaving. On her way out, the door shuts behind her. Examining it, the door suddenly slams shut on her. The force throws her to the ground. Now convinced that something unholy is in the house, Grace runs outside in search of the local priest to bless the house. Before leaving, Grace instructs Mr. Tuttle to check a small nearby cemetery to see if a family has been buried there with a little boy named Victor. Mr. Tuttle finds the cemetery but covers the gravestones with leaves at the order of Mrs. Mills, who assures him that Grace will learn the reasons behind the unexplained events in due time. Grace gets lost in the mist and she finds her husband Charles, who looks lost and disoriented. Reunited, they return home together and he is introduced to Mrs. Mills, who is a bit rattled to see him. Charles heads upstairs and after reuniting with his children, he goes to his bedroom where he remains for the rest of the day, distant and unresponsive. Later on, Grace checks up on Anne, whom she has left to play in a spare room. Instead of finding her daughter, she's horrified to see an old woman wearing Anne's communion dress and veil. The old woman claims in Anne's voice, "I am your daughter," and a frightened Grace attacks the figure only to find that it was merely an illusion and Grace has inadvertently attacked her own daughter. Afterward, Anne tells her brother that their mother has gone mad in the same way she did that day. Returning to her bedroom, Charles tells her that Anne relayed the events of the previous week and she breaks down, telling him it wasn't her fault. He tells her he has to return to the war and Grace is unable to convince him that the war is over. They share a romantic night together and wake up alone the next morning. Hearing her children scream, Grace rushes to them to discover that all the curtains have been removed. Enraged and hysterical, she accuses the servants of theft and insists they tell her where the curtains have been hidden. They deny the accusations and she threatens them with a gun, demanding they leave the property. Grace spends the day ripping apart the house looking for the curtains. Later that night, the children, who are frightened by their mother, climb out the window and go searching for their father. Meanwhile, Grace searches the servants' room and finds an envelope on the bed, containing a photograph of Mr. Tuttle, Lydia, and Mrs. Mills, inscribed 1891, the missing pages from the album. Outside in the mist, Anne comes across the gravestones of the three servants, and then she sees them in the distance. They're approaching her and Nicholas, and they both run into the house with the servants following close behind. Grace is there and she locks them out and tells her children to hide while she fends them off. Mrs. Mills then tells Grace from outside the doors that it's too late and that now she has to go and find them herself. Meanwhile, Nicholas and Anne run upstairs into a wardrobe and hide, but the door is thrown open to reveal a white-haired old lady with sightless eyes, and everyone screams. Grace arrives and opens the door to a group of people who are sitting around a table, including the old lady, now acting as the speaker of the seance. She is asking the children why they are lingering around in death and scribbling on a pad of paper. Anne and Nicholas scream that they aren't dead and shake the table to try to get the group to listen to them. Grace grabs the paper, tears it apart, and throws it in the air when suddenly she and the children disappear. The table is no longer shaking, and the torn paper falls from above as the participants of the seance look on. The old woman snaps out of her trance and the scene changes to Grace and her children huddled on the floor. Finally realizing they are all ghosts, she confesses to smothering them with a pillow and shooting herself afterward. Mrs. Mills appears and tells her they've all returned to live together, unable to tell her before. The children and Grace, no longer afraid of the sunlight, watches on as Victor and his family leave the house and wait for another family to arrive. The end. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed the video, leave a comment down below. For more movie recaps, don't forget to click the like and subscribe button. See you next time.